Hey guys, Infidel 1258 here. Today we're going to get into another clip from the Town Hall. We're talking this time about 3-mana summoners and why the dual splinter common summoners can be 3-mana. Apparently there's been a cry to have them be raised to 4. People think 3 is too inexpensive. More than one person talked about this within the Town Hall, raising this within the comment section of the Town Hall. But here we're going to hear Yaba and CallMeTim respond to this. They've thoughtfully considered it. This is a bit of a longer clip from them, but I want you to hear the thoughtfulness and the future proofing for why they would leave it at 3 mana. I think their thought process is going to be extremely important to help build and reinforce our confidence in their vision for the future. If that sounds interesting, stick around, stay tuned, like and subscribe. Let's get into it.
So I think that plus the new cards, the new abilities, and the new tactics are really gonna make it even that much more awesome, which is why I brought it up. I saw there were some comments on the 3-mana summoners, and I know we've talked about that at extreme length with a lot of people internally. Do you want to talk about that at all here? And I'm happy to share my thoughts too.
Yeah, maybe both. I think there's a lot of passionate discussion around the right way to cost the 3-mana, what are currently 3-mana dual element summoners. And for me, I think the summoners themselves, their playability, usability isn't dramatically impacted by whether they cost 3 or 4. Obviously, it does, right? 1 mana could matter a lot in certain situations. But generally speaking, I think when are you going to grab these summoners? Will you grab them, more or less at 3 or 4? I don't know that it's that big of a distinction. What is really relevant and what most of the conversation seems to be around is what does that do to other summoners and summoners that are costed in that kind of cost range. And I think the arguments really come down to two trade-offs, and I don't think there's really a right answer here. And people who feel passionately about one or the other will say no, there's definitely a right answer. It's the one that I support, right? But I don't really think there is a right answer here. And I think it really comes down to, do we risk a little bit of devaluing from as far as playability goes for existing summoners? So will you reach for these new summoners at 3 mana more often because they're 3 than you would other similar costed summoners? And the other side of it, though, is what can we do? What is the design space for summoners going forward and the cost? And I think, at costing them at 3 leaves us the ability to cost future multi-element summoners at 4 and 5 that can do interesting things, 4, 5, and 6. And if I had to trade off, between the two options there, which again, I don't really think there's a right answer. It's just trade-offs, right? Which trade-offs do you want to make? I would err towards leaving the design space open for summoners going forward, and therefore, I think a 3-costed multi-element summoner makes sense to me. What do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess to summarize, I feel like what we ended on is that we are now for sort of the first time in Splinterlands history designing for the future, and so we're thinking less. We're trying not to worry as much about like what were cards in the past, right? We have the kind of the goal for the older cards, first and foremost at this point, is that now they can go and work on land, right? I mean, it's always going to be the case with any trading card game that there's going to be older cards that players don't use as much anymore. So we're addressing that problem through land and other things that we have in mind for the future. And so we don't want to sort of like hamstring ourselves because of decisions that were made without really that much thought or knowledge or understanding in the past. Like we didn't have people like CallMeTim here designing sets. It was just me, for the most part, doing card stats along with all the other crap I had been doing. And things were not always priced, mana cost, or statted the right way, like thinking for the future. So we are kind of, in a way, starting over from that perspective, and we're always cognizant of past cards. We don't want to just go, we're making new cards that are just flat out, going to destroy the old cards. It's really important, the value of the assets that myself, our team members, and our community has. But ultimately, from a game design perspective, we're sort of trying to take a blank slate in a lot of ways, wherever we are able to, and say, what's the best way to design this for the future? What are we thinking for future sets? What are we leaving ourselves open to be able to do in the future versus closing ourselves off from?
I'm going to leave it there. I want to respond to what I'm hearing CallMeTim and Yaba say. I do like that they are being thoughtful around this. I do like that they're specifically commenting on a critique that the audience is raising. There is a significant enough response saying 3 mana is too good, too low for multicolor summoners. And the implication is that there would be all these new synergies and possibilities of teams a depth of card pool that is just massively bigger than anything we've seen before. And I think all that's true, but they don't have any abilities is one thing we have to remember. Plus, if they want to do, like he said, CallMeTim said, if we want to do 4 mana and 5 mana multicolor summoners and let them be like not legendary, I'm assuming he means like really to keep them in that sort of rare epic range. And that might be what he's thinking. 3 mana commons, 4 mana rares, 5 mana epics. You have to think about it from that perspective. If we get to that place where there's that many multicolor summoners, these ones at 3 mana are not the biggest deal. That's what I hear him say when he talks about 3 versus 4, because he's not just talking about these ones could be 3 or they could be 4 mana. He's saying these ones could be 3 and some other ones could be 4 mana. And when you see those in comparison to these, you're going to feel, okay, 3 mana makes sense. Now we're speaking about it from the context of like this modern moment where those 4 mana, 5 mana, those other multicolor summoners are not yet here. And I think that is the disadvantage we have as community members that they don't suffer from, because CallMeTim, Yabamat, Investigator, Nate are behind the scenes of the creation of the planning. They have the meetings to talk about where we're going with this thing. And I guess at the end of the day, what I'm really saying is that I trust these guys with what they're aiming at, what they're doing. And I think we've seen so many reasons for that, whether it's the money they pour into the DAO, literally millions of dollars being gifted to the DAO through, for instance, Rebellion pack sales or Rifter Watcher packs themselves being put into the DAO, etc., etc., etc. It seems to me time after time, they've proven themselves to deserve our trust and confidence. And I think some people will disagree with that. But part of my posture for why this game has room to be revolutionary, has room to change my life, is because that confidence stands on a foundation of this team and who they are. And so if you don't share that confidence, I wouldn't even try and invite you to. I'm not trying to convince you. But I speak to this moment and this question out of a trust and a confidence for who they are based on who they've shown themselves to be, the scrupulous nature of their prior actions, their generosity, again, with the DAO, with money, with, planning, etc., etc., etc. So that now when I hear them saying, I think we need these at 3, I'm willing to extend that. Now I do want to do one more thing before we close. I see a comment in the live chat on this topic from Byzantinist, and he's a big Splinterlands guy and huge investor, and the person who the Byzantine kitty is named after. And he's got a contrary position. So let's read that. We'll respond to this and then we'll wrap. He goes, actually, I think the opposite. Making the multicolor summoners 3 mana, the common ones, closes the design space for future 3 mana summoners, especially non-dual element ones. I disagree, but let's go on. Furthermore, having access to a whole other splinter gives you extra access to a fiend, lets you use more cheap no attack monsters like the 2 mana from each splinter for weapons trainer, etc., etc. And he's right, there's lots of 1 mana monsters, 2 mana monsters, 0 mana monsters that are really powerful and effective, especially if you're playing in the wild. And so these multicolor summoners are absolutely going to be powerful. And for 3 mana, that's going to be great. I do think they're going to be really impactful. I think you're going to want those multicolor 3 mana summoners. Does that mean they're overpowered or broken? I think, as is common with our community who is so passionate, we sometimes get in front of and just assume, like, I think we jumped the gun a little bit with respect to this is broken, this is that, this is terrible, etc. And I'd say we're about as right as often as we are wrong. I think that's probably fair, meaning we are not 100% calling these things. Like, at times we get it right, at times we get it wrong, just like the team. I would say specifically on this issue of making the 3 mana, the multicolor summoners, the common ones, 3 mana, it closes design space for future 3 mana summoners. Why would that be so? I mean, future summoners, if you want, that are not multi-color, for instance, future 3 mana summoners could have a cool ability, and that's impactful. If you even look at the 3 mana summoners that exist now, and you look at the like +1 heart, +1 armor, +1 magic, +1 melee, those are impactful abilities and buffs. And so it absolutely is it's a dealer's choice. Like, which are you going to prefer? I'm saying, of course, it's going to be powerful to pull together two splinters. Yes. but it definitely is still powerful and functional and useful to utilize a summoner who has a classic +1 ability, +1, stat. Are those old cards out of date now in some sense? Maybe less powerful, less important? Perhaps. Let's give the final word to Matt. He said, yeah, he points to land. He's like, look, this is why if there are cards that you need to put out to pasture, you literally put them out to pasture. You put them in land and they go to work forevermore, earning, a certain degree of revenue from your plots of land. And if you don't own plots of land, you can, in the not too distant future, I'm sure you'll be able to surf that land. And so when we get into recognizing that the greater vision, whether it's, 4 mana multicolor summoners or 5 mana later on, and what that'll make these 3 mana multicolored summoners look like, or whether we think through land and really how that invites a usefulness, a functionality, a power, and an influence for cards that we might eventually come to think of as underpowered. He doesn't want to be hamstrung by, we did X before, now we can only do Y because that follows after X. Well, why don't we think outside the blocks? Why don't we try something new? Why don't we go, maybe we go too far trying something, but as we've always done, when we go too far, we look at, even with Byzantine Kitty, which is ironically the summoner that is the best summoner in this game and is the summoner of the commenter of that comment. That's literally the most overpowered summoner. And yet Byzantinist was happy to see that exist. So I'm just saying, we create content, we create monsters and summoners and new expansions to the game that are going to change how the game feels. And sometimes those changes are going to be overpowered in one nature or another, in one circumstance or another, one rule set, one mana cap or another. And if so, we will use them. And if they lack that utility, we will find other places for them. The price will reflect that. They'll get put to work in land. They may be, they may be utilized by newer players that can't afford some expensive cards, but they want to play the game and have access to some cards, and so they access, right? There's always an angle for somebody, and in certain context. So I'm excited to see what Splinterlands does with that. I'm excited to see these allegedly 4 and 5 mana multicolors that they're already thinking about. We know that we've got, essentially we're going to get half of the summoners. Let's look them up right now. The common multicolor summoners. We've got Fire Earth, Water Death, Earth Life, Life Water, Death Fire. The others that will come in later, there's combinations that are not present here and that they will be offered later. So you can imagine those will be 4 mana monsters, summoners rather, and 5 epics, and rares and epics makes a lot of sense. I'm excited to see where that goes. I wonder if you are too. Let me know in the comments below. Have an amazing day. God bless.